including, okay, I gotta say, got it. Painting, including landscape painting, has always been an indoor art. Only once, and only briefly, in the heyday of Impressionism, did open-air work become the norm. Before Impressionism, outdoor painting, when practiced at all, was distinctly subordinate to studio work. So we have this really interesting situation, since we've all grown up with 150, 200 years of plein air painting, we consider it pretty normal. But it really was the exception to the rule. We had 300, 400 years of landscape painting where everyone painted their landscapes inside. So the question is, what do we get from plein air painting that we can't get from inside? And maybe vice versa. What do we get inside that we can't get from plein air painting? This first slide is a landscape by Claude Joseph Vernet, who was a great 18th century landscape painter. And this was painted completely indoors. And it's a very typical painting of this period. In other words, this is not a place, a real place you could go to. This is an imaginary place. This is an idea, actually, of what a landscape should look like. And it has all the things that were important to them in the 18th century. It has some antique ruins up on top there. It has part of an old castle. It has the whiff of something Roman, the aqueduct in the background. It has both live and dead trees. It has a significant water feature in the way of a waterfall right in the middle. And it has either peasants or travelers reveling on the side. These were all different tropes that were always present in these paintings, and people looked for them and wanted them in their paintings. One thing you can notice about this painting is, from our perspective, how dark it is. Let's look at the next one. This is similar in many ways. It was done at about the same time. This was done by Pierre-Henri Valenciennes. And Valenciennes is a very important figure for us in plein air painting. You can see right away that this painting is in a much higher key. It's much brighter. It has the same basic things. It has some ruins, it has a castle, it has a water feature, this time a smaller one. It has people drinking from the fountain. It has dead trees and live trees. In other words, it has all the same ingredients, but aesthetically, it's got a big difference. It's much brighter. Colors are more stretched out. The blues in the background there in the mountain are much more pronounced than anything in the Vernet. And the question is, how is Valenciennes able to do this? Really, nobody else in his period could paint this way. And the reason is that in addition to doing these, I'll call them studio concoctions, Valenciennes was a huge proponent of painting outdoors. He was not the first, but he was the first one to codify it as part of artist training. In other words, he insisted that his students go outside and paint. Let's look at the next one. This is a beautiful Valenciennes study of some farm buildings. And you can see how modern this painting looks. I mean, this could have been painted last year by a student. And one of the things that makes this painting so important is that Valenciennes said that you could never work on the same painting for more than 2 hours. And what he meant by that is he felt that the sun moved so dramatically in that period that the lighting would be completely different. I mean, we all know that you can't work on the same painting in the morning as in the afternoon, right? Something that's in full sun in the morning might be in deep shade in the afternoon. But he took it a step further and said, well, you know, from 9 to 11, the sun moves enough so that at 11:30, it's a different painting. So he had his students prime up dozens and dozens of pieces of paper, work on a painting for 2 hours, and then move on to the next one. And so speed, let's say, is a fairly important ingredient in much of plein air painting. The idea that you're not going to do a finished painting in the sense of having tremendous numbers of details, but you will have a complete statement as to weather and atmosphere and light and structure, things like that, all done very, very quickly. Another thing that's really important about this painting is that it's of a pretty unimportant set of farm buildings. In other words, at the time, most of the paintings that were done were what they called vedute. They were views, and they were views of important monuments. They were, of the Colosseum or of Hadrian's Villa or of very recognizable places. Valenciennes said, well, you can do that, but you can also turn your back on those things and paint anything. You can paint, a humble set of buildings. It doesn't have to be an important place. So this idea of sort of average, ordinary, vernacular buildings versus important monuments is another big aspect of plein air painting. The idea that sketches were very important started to grow at this period. Let me read you something that Diderot said. He said, Diderot was the great French encyclopedist. He said, sketches possess a warmth that finished pictures do not. They represent a state of ardor and pure verve on the artist's part, which no admixture of the affected elaboration introduced by thought. Through the sketch, the painter's very soul is poured forth onto the canvas. So we have this idea that in a quick sketch, we're getting to the very heart of the artist's response. And as painters, we all know that we want to try to preserve that initial response, and that as you work on something, you can tend to bury that initial response by elaboration. So the question is, how do you save that? It's a very important issue and comes up again and again. But this idea of verve and ardor, I think, is very important in plein air painting. So let's look at the next one. Here's a gorgeous Valenciennes study. It's a view of Rome. And that's a hell of a lot of painting for 2 hours, I've got to say. It's got a lot of topographical information in it, as well as a beautiful sense of that very tender daylight. It's really kind of an amazing painting. Let's look at the next one. So before people started going outside with oil paints, artists tended, when they worked outside, to draw. They would go outside with chalk, with charcoal, with ink, with all kinds of things, and make drawings, and then they would work from the drawings. So this is a Leonardo da Vinci drawing of a mountain range, and very typical of many of the studies he did. Let's look at the next one. Drawings like this will end up in the background of paintings like this, his different various Madonnas. And so those mountains were actually studied from the drawings of nature, but were not painted from nature directly. Leonardo applied what he called aerial perspective, which is different from linear perspective. Linear perspective says basically that as objects get further away from us, they get smaller, which we know is true. They appear to get smaller, let's put it that way. Aerial perspective says not only do they appear to get smaller, they get less distinct and they get bluer, they get cooler. And that has to do with the intervening amount of water vapor between you and whatever it is you're looking at in the distance. And we all know this from driving down the road. The trees right around you are bright green, and the trees way in the distance are much, much bluer. So he's applying those ideas to this painting. Okay, next. Artists like Albrecht Dürer went out and did tremendous number of drawings, like this one of Antwerp Harbor. This one's done in pen and ink. Next. Durer also was one of the first artists, I mean, right around 1500, to go out with colors. He went out with his watercolors, and he made several journeys up the Rhine. And this is a watercolor that he did of a mill village. And again, it has a tremendous amount of topographical information, as well as a nice sense of aerial perspective in there. All right, next. And this is another one of our beautiful Valenciennes studies. And you can see Valenciennes did not care if he finished this painting. In other words, if there was paint on every inch of the canvas. You can see some of his brown sort of drawing lines there in the bottom. These paintings actually were not meant for public consumption. They became part of an artist's studio, and they became part of his or her body of reference materials, so that you would do a painting like this of a group of farm buildings, and the next time you were, asked to do an altarpiece or something that needed some farm buildings in it, you'd go through your studies, F for farm building, and you pick out the relevant ones and you put them in the paintings. So artists tended to keep these to themselves. They never thought of exhibiting them. No one ever would have exhibited them. And it's so interesting that in our day and age, the Valenciennes 2-hour studies are so prized, and nobody could care less really about the big studio concoctions that won him all the awards at the Academy. Corot had such a body of these studies that apparently other artists would come to him and ask if they could borrow them, because he pinned down certain qualities of light so perfectly that they wanted to use them in their paintings. Likewise, John Constable, the English landscape painter, did many studies outdoor on paper. And when someone asked to buy one of them, he said, "I would gladly part with the corn, but not with the field that gave rise to it." So he saw those studies as being quite fertile, and the ground out of which his larger paintings grew. All right, next. This is another incredible Valenciennes painting of a storm that's gathering over a building on a lake. And you can see the storms just unleashed this torrent of water on that house. And to be able to capture something as fleeting as that, because in the next 10 minutes, Valenciennes was absolutely drenched by this storm as it passed over his head. So it really is a remarkable painting. All right, next. Now, I'm going to show you a pair of paintings. And to me, these are both by Valenciennes. And to me, these are two of the most remarkable paintings in the history of Western art. They are a pair of little paintings that he did out his window of rooftops in Rome. So you're seeing this. This could be an Edward Hopper, right? When one of Valenciennes' students complained about being sick and said, "I have nothing to paint because I have to stay at home," this is what Valenciennes said. He said, "Your illness does not keep you from painting from nature, even in case of rain, since you must see something from your window. It doesn't matter what." That's an incredible thing to say. It might be only a wall that you find to study. Remember that I made studies of old chimneys at Rome, meaning this painting. To say to someone that it doesn't matter what you're painting is an extraordinary statement for that time, meaning the mid-1700s, because we're, smack in the highest classicizing period where everything was idealized, and the idea of a beautiful painting had to be of beautiful objects. What this says is that it's not the objects themselves that matter, it's how light hits it and how the artist sees that. how the artist interprets these things. So it's a pre-romantic view of putting the emphasis not on the nature, but on the artist's response to what he or she is seeing. So this is a really revolutionary thing to say. So now let's look at the next painting. Boom, same exact setup, but this time in the sunlight. So he's taking two things in different weather conditions and painting them and looking at how different they are one from another. And this is an amazing thing because, again, it tells you that what's important is light, air, atmosphere. These are things that either, show things to advantage or maybe hide things or show them to disadvantage. But what we're after is the quality of light. And that's what these paintings really presaged. They really are the beginning of something that you're quite familiar with. Let's look at the next one. We all know Monet's Rouen Cathedral series, which is a very similar idea, to take this piece of architecture and look at it in many different lighting and weather conditions. Monet apparently rented an apartment right across the street, I believe on the second floor above a shop, and had a window right out onto the plaza in front of the church. And he literally had 50 or 60 canvases there. And like Valenciennes, he believed that you couldn't work on a painting. In Monet's case, he said 45 minutes. And so you can imagine Monet working on a painting like crazy, putting it away, taking out the next one, working on it, putting it away, taking out the next one, boom, 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 like that. And that's assuming that, you get days that are similar. You could get one day that's sunny and one day that's cloudy. And on the cloudy day, you got to work on a whole different painting or set of paintings. So it really started something very, very important in the history of art. There's another example. Let's look at the next one, Peter. We all know Monet's haystack series, where he took these haystacks, and we can look at the next one, and painted them again in all sorts of weather conditions. And it was the atmosphere and the weather that was really important in these pieces. All right, next. This is a beautiful sky study by John Constable, the English landscape painter. And we're getting the beginnings of sky studies. Now, I mean, people must have done some kind of sky studies before, because the Van Ruysdaels had incredible studies in their paintings, skies in their paintings, but we didn't see this proliferation of studies of very particular weather patterns. And it turns out that Constable's interest in skies coincided with the first real scientific classification of clouds. So he knew a man who was actually studying clouds and who gave clouds the terms that we know: nimbus, cumulus, cirrus, all of those different words to describe formations of clouds. And so Constable would do these paintings and write on the back the day and the hour, and then he'd say, this is a nimbus cumulus with a blah, 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 blah. And he was trying to be almost as scientific as artistic about it. Let's look at the next one. Yeah, this is a beautiful, beautiful sky study by a Belgian artist named Claude Michel Cels, C-E-L-S. And you can see he painted on a brown ground, a sort of a beigeish, tawny ground, and you can see he didn't cover it in all the places. But what a gorgeous sense of the light, coming through those clouds, and just putting those two birds in there give you a sense of the openness of this environment that he's painted. All right, next. Yes, and this is a cloud painting by Wilhelm Christopher Eckersberg, the great Danish painter. And by the way, those of you who are in New York, there's an incredible show up right now at the Metropolitan Museum of Danish painting from this period. And they have at least a dozen Eckersberg paintings of different kinds. So make sure you get over to take a look at that. Constable said that in landscape painting, the sky was the organ of sentiment, the organ of sentiment. And what he meant by that was whatever was going on in the sky was going to give you an idea about how you should feel about what was going on the earth. If it was stormy and tempestuous, that was one thing. If it was calm and bright, that was one thing. If it was sort of in the middle of flux or change, that was something else. Let's look at the next one. Eckersberg is a really interesting artist for us because Eckersberg painted outside very, very assiduously, but he was not interested in those questions of spontaneity and verve and all of those things. He wanted his outdoor work to have the authority of indoor work, meaning that he went back and modified the drawing and strengthened things and did all kinds of things. And what he got from outdoors was an intense examination of the color. In other words, that's the one thing that you really cannot get from drawings. It's something that you cannot get from memory, is just studying the color firsthand outside. It's something that you cannot get from photographs, and we can talk about that at some point. But anyway, here's Eckersberg doing plein air paintings, but in a very different way. Let's look at the next one. Here's this extraordinary painting he did of the Colosseum. This is not a big painting. It's like this big. So you can imagine the intensity of the details in there. And to give you a sense of how assiduous he was about reality, let me just tell you the full title of this painting. The title of the painting is View Through 3 of the Northwestern Arches in the 3rd Story of the Colosseum in Rome. In other words, he wanted to pin this down exactly, and he wanted you to know exactly where you were. And he wanted you to be able to find it again, probably, if that was your druthers. All right, let's look at the next one. So the question is, how did this all come about? People starting to paint outside, particularly in oil paints. And there are two very pedestrian, but really important reasons, and they're quite practical. The first on the left is oil paint in tubes. I mean, we just take it for granted that oil paint comes in tubes, but it didn't always. In other words, for centuries, it came in glass jars or clay pots, or way back in Durer's time, people stored them in pig's bladders and sausage casings and things like that, anything that would stop it from drying out. But those things were almost impossible to take around. They were too heavy, too bulky, too cumbersome. So the idea of putting small amounts of paint into these tubes that you could easily squeeze out the paint was something very radical. And then the other thing on the right is the classic French easel, which is an extraordinary piece of engineering, because all of your, stuff goes inside your paints and brushes and palette. You can hang your painting on the side and work on it. And then the whole thing, the legs and whatnot, fold up into a box, and it's the size of an attaché case. It's a little heavier than an attaché case, but there you go. So anyway, these two sort of, engineering advances made plein air painting possible. All right, next. So here we have a whole bunch of images of artists painting outside. This is Monet painting in Renoir's garden. This beautiful image of him just working outside with all those beautiful flowers. Let's look at the next one. This is Jules Cogniet. It's a view of Boson Mountain with this artist right there, sort of on the brink, looking out at this extraordinary expanse of mountain. And what we're going to find is with plein air painting, with depictions of plein air painting, let's put it that way, there are kind of two groups. One, it's more of a social activity. And two, the second kind, is the artist is alone and is facing the largeness of the universe, the power of nature, or things like that. They're two very different kind of camps. All right, let's look at the next one. There's Augustin Infant's painting of an artist who's in the Fontainebleau forest, and he's looking out over a stream. And there he is perched on a rock right on the precipice there, working away on his painting of the river as it's going down. Wonderful image, again, of an artist by himself taking on a powerful part of nature. All right, next. This is one of my favorite photographs in the world. Look at this. There's this ruined building, and there's this artist right there with his umbrella painting a picture of the ruins. And when I showed this photograph to someone, he said, "What temple is that?" And I said, that's very funny. It's actually not a temple. It's a US post office. And this is a picture of the 1905 San Francisco earthquake. But it tells you something about architecture at the time in the United States, that government buildings had to look like Greek temples in order to inspire confidence. All right, let's look at the next one. This one I love. It's Rockwell Kent painting out in Greenland. I mean, imagine being out in that cold painting. And by the way, the National Science Foundation actually has positions for artists. They take 2 artists a year to go to Antarctica and paint. And Frederick Church painted icebergs in Antarctica. I don't know if you've seen those studies, but they're really extraordinary. Let's look at the next one, which is a detail of this artist. There he is, my God, with the sled dogs, and he's using the back of the sled to prop up his canvas. What an extraordinary image. All right, next. And then people sort of risked life and limb to paint all sorts of extreme places. Like, this is Giuseppe De Nettis's painting of Mount Vesuvius erupting. So there was a whole school of painters who painted Vesuvius at different stages of its activity. De Nettis painted something like 70 or 80 little paintings of the volcano erupting. I think there's another one after this, Peter. No, go back one. There we go. Beautiful little studies. I mean, imagine how quickly you have to paint and accurately to capture the sense of the steam and the smoke coming out of the mountain. All right, next. This one is yours truly painting out under the Manhattan Bridge. In 1983, I was working on a great big cityscape of the bridge, and it was sweltering hot that day. It was really, really hot. And just for some reason, a New York Times reporter came by and just couldn't get enough of this image. So he took this picture, and it was on the front page as their weather feature. Like, look at how hot it is in New York, and look at how crazy New Yorkers behave when it gets this hot. So anyway, one can, paint in pretty extreme situations. Let's look at the next one. This is a lot closer to what we're going to be doing, so no fears. This is a John Singer Sargent painting of a loggia in Florence, and there are actually 2 artists working. One we see from behind on the left, and one straight ahead. And this is a really nice way to paint. You're sort of outdoors and you're sort of indoors. You're in a loggia, so you're not in the direct sun, and you're seated, and you can look out into the garden or whatever and have a beautiful view, but you're also really close to a bathroom, and you're really close to someone who can bring you a drink or something like that. So this kind of is a hybrid form of plein air painting that's quite wonderful. All right, next. Here's another Sargent painting, this one of Monet, painting out in the forest. And again, we talk about this question of verve and speed. Look at Monet's palette and painting hand. Palette, it's just a flurry of brushstrokes. He's not beginning to define these things. And I think that's a really important thing. In most plein air painting that's painted quickly, at least, we're not talking about Eckersberg, but this quicker version of it, what's given up is the drawing, because it's the drawing that takes time to marry. Solid drawing and color is a very time-intensive procedure. So most impressionists just completely threw drawing out the window. And when it came to paint a tree, they spent a lot of time mixing the right color, but then they put down one blob stroke. That's it. That's the tree. So you can see that very clearly in this. The other thing I want to point out, in so many of these images that I found, again, some of the solitary artists confronting nature, but these others, more social ones, there are a million paintings of men painting with a woman sitting somewhere nearby looking on. And there's this strange combination of men and women in these paintings. Let's look at the next one. This is another Sargent painting. This one is of his friend Paul Helleu, who's just decided impromptu to paint this painting. They're out in a canoe. He and his girl are out in this canoe, and ostensibly they were fishing because he's using the fishing pole to sturdy up his canvas, and he decides that he needs to paint a painting. So there he is, and he's working away, and his girl is not all that interested, but there she is. And look at their two hats. It's a wonderful kind of union of man and woman with the very different types of hats. And I've seen so many paintings like this that it made me think that there's something erotic about painting outside. And I mean that in the broadest sense, that it stimulates all of your senses. You're out in the sun, you're out in the wind, you feel things, your body feels alive, you're moving in a way that you're not always in the studio. And so it's erotic in that sense. It engages your whole body and all of your senses. Let's look at the next one. This is what we'll be doing in Sicily. This is a painting from last year, a photograph from last year's workshop in Marsala. Again, we just happen to have a man and a woman. I didn't pick this photograph, but there it is. All right, let's look at the next one. Here's a painting by Manet of Monet in his boat studio. In other words, Monet really wanted to, capture effects on the water. So he had himself a boat customized in order to be a studio. It was sort of like the first version of Pimp My Boat. And he got it all set out so that he could paint. And there, what do you know? There's a woman in the cabin there. All right, next. And here's a John Singer Sargent, another one. And at least this time we have the woman painting and the man is standing around waiting for her to finish. And he's ready to explode, as you can see by the fountain coming out of his head. It's sort of an interesting image because in point of fact, this couple, both people are artists. So you'd think he'd be a little more interested in what was going on. All right, next. This is an image. This is a photograph that I just picked off of Instagram this week. It's an ad for Plein Air magazine. We have a magazine in this country that's single-handedly devoted to plein air painting, which is an amazing thing. But when you look at this, what's going on? She's painting inside. She's not outdoors at all. So what does that mean, plein air? What does that say, again, about this back and forth between inside and outside and what you can get from painting indoors and what you can get from painting outdoors? As far as I can tell, this painting indoors of landscapes in our time has largely to do with the lure of photographs. Photographs have gotten, much better than they ever were. They're so easily available. You can keep your conditions stable, and people like to work from photographs. And really, plein air painting has almost to justify itself for what it can deliver that painting from photographs can't. And what I would say to you is this: when you're looking at a photograph, you're looking at something. You're looking at something that's outside of you. When you're painting plein air, you are in your painting. You are inside what it is that you're doing. You are a part of it. You are not detached and looking at it. In other words, the sky is not just a backdrop in front of you. It's something that actually goes over your head and behind you, just as the ground goes under your feet and behind you. And I would argue that many of the things that get into good plein air paintings are not the visual, they're the sounds, there's the feeling of the breeze, there's taking your shoes off and sticking your toes in the mud. And all of those things get into the painting in a way that you might not realize that they do. So this is a really important endeavor and needs to be differentiated from what's often going on. All right, let's look at the next one, and I'll just sort of get through the rest of these. This is a George Bellows painting, The Lone Tenement. And the reason I pull this out is that this painting looks like a plein air painting. It has all of the distinguishing characteristics, but it was painted indoors. Bellows wants to make you think that it was painted outdoors, or at least it has that kind of energy and that kind of exposure to the elements that you would get. Let's look at a couple of details quickly. There's one. Look at how thick and beautiful that paint is. The impasto is extraordinary. Okay, and next. Here's another one. I mean, de Kooning had nothing on Bellows as far as I can see. All right, next. Here's another great Bellows, Men at the Docks. And the paint is so loose and so thick, you would swear that it was painted outside, but it's of a scale that makes that almost impossible. All right, next. And then I'll just show you this piece. This is I'll show you two pieces. This is a piece of mine that I did outdoors. This is a view of Baltimore. People thought it was Rome. They said, is that the Coliseum? It's actually Raven Stadium. But I spent a good part of a summer on the roof of a warehouse there, looking out over the city with its extraordinary architecture and crazy admixture of industrial and residential and leisure time buildings all around each other. So the point I want to make here is that some landscape paintings, the emphasis is on topography, showing you what a place actually looks like so that maybe you could find it again, or if you were going there, you would know exactly what it looked like. Or if you were a sociologist or a historian, you could glean information for the image. But many landscape paintings are much more interested in mood or atmosphere than they are in topography. Let's look at one more. I'm sorry, this is another one that I painted outdoors of a factory, Lucky Strike factory. Let's look at the next one. All right, one more. All right, sorry, I'm gonna give you one more pair. This is George Inness. This is his painting of the Lackawanna Valley and the railroad that goes into the roundhouse that's up in the Lackawanna Valley. This was commissioned by the president of the railroad, who wanted an image of this burgeoning railroad. And he actually insisted that Inness put more tracks in than there actually were, because he wanted people to think that the railroad was bigger than it was. And Inness refused to do it. So this tug about accuracy and topography is a very important one. And then let's look at the next one. Here's a late Inness. So this is all about atmosphere and mood. This has nothing to do with topography. You have no idea where you are in this painting. You could be almost anywhere in the world. As it turns out, you're in Montclair, New Jersey. So Inness's career had this beautiful arc of starting out in a topographical tradition and moving to a more emotive tonalist tradition by the time he died. So anyway, I think, Peter, this would probably be a good place to stop. I've been talking for a while now, and
we can power through the last few if you want.
Yeah, sure. Why don't you go through to whatever you want to end with?
You want to say some words about your beautiful work here?
Well, this is a cityscape I did of Rome. This is a view from the Capitoline Hill looking southwest over the city. And I'm just, blown away by the different types of architecture that you can see. Architecture from every century is in the same view. And I just love these views of Rome. All right. And now, that was a topographical view. This is something very different. This is a very emotive, this beautiful scene of the James River in winter. Just everything was dissolving into this sort of wet, cold stew, foggy, where you could barely see things. And I just loved the atmosphere of this one. All right, next, I think there's another James River piece here. Yeah, this one. It's really just about the color and the atmosphere and the way that makes you feel. Again, you might not even know you are on the James River. You could be on many different rivers in the world at this point. Yeah. Here are some paintings that I did in Italy, some plein air paintings. These were all done outside. These were probably done in 2 to 3 sittings. So I would start it one day and then come back the next day and usually finish it up. Every once in a while, I had to come back a third day. This is in Umbria. This is Mount Tezio. I think the next one is also Mount Tezio. Yep. Those beautiful patchwork fields that they have in Italy that are so beautiful. All right. Another 2, these are in Tuscany. This is from a castle named Monteguffone, which is outside of Florence. And these are 2 views. The one on the right, I think, was done in 1 sitting, and the one on the left was probably more like 4 sittings. And you can see it has a lot more information in it. There was a town in the middle ground and a hill town in the background that I really wanted to, pin down. And again, the question of trying to pin down certain things without losing that initial strong attack and the initial big feeling of light is the most important thing in developing paintings. Yeah. And then finally, this is a painting that I did of my wife, Sarah, on the balcony at Monteguffone. And this one was actually done at home because it's a fairly large painting. And so what I tried to do was take my studies of the landscape and use them as color references. And then I painted her with her modeling, and I was able to sort of piece these things together. So one of my great aims as a painter has been to kind of marry the authority of studio work with the spontaneity and the truthfulness to color of outdoor work. And that's just taken me a lifetime of figuring out how to do that. But I think it's something well worth doing. So there we go.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ephraim, for such a wonderful insight into your process and the thoughts and history of plein air painting. I hope everyone has that was deeply informative and quite wonderful. We're so excited here at Artists Retreats to be hosting Ephraim fairly soon for a wonderful workshop in Sicily, where we will be diving a lot deeper, obviously, and also in a very sort of practical sense, tackling a lot of these topics that have just been discussed today. And I think it's I for one cannot wait to be there and be experiencing the immersion of being inside of the painting. I love how you how you put it. The sky is not a backdrop; it actually extends over you, and the ground extends under you. It's a perfect summary. Yeah, I think fantastic. And as a thank you, for all of you for joining us today, and as a sort of a something special for having stuck around, made it to the end, so to speak. We have a special offer at the moment in place, where if you or someone that that would be interested is interested in a discount on the ticket, you can use the code on the screen right here. And if anyone has any issues with seeing it, I can send it to you afterwards, or write it in chat or something. Maybe you can write it in chat, Stacy, so people can see it there. And what you're seeing here is some of the pictures of the absolutely stunning location that we'll be staying in Sicily. This gorgeous hotel nestled in the olive fields. Every day the sun sets down. This is the sun setting against the ocean, or behind the ocean rather, and the sky just lights up in the deepest shades of red, and it's quite jaw-dropping, and not painting related, but it's not bad to have either. The food is out of this world in Sicily. We have incredibly fresh produce and very talented history of cooking there. There's just it's a feast for all the senses. It's quite a charged location, actually. And this sort of simply stunning kind of vistas that really, I know for me when I first arrived, it was quite jaw-dropping and breathtaking in a sense. There's a certain primal sense to the landscape. It has this beautiful, soft, rolling kind of valleys and farmlands, and then these really dramatic rock structures emerging out of the ocean, and all bathed in just the most incredible light. These images right here are actually right around the corner from where we're staying, and actually where we'll be painting. In fact, these are salt flats in Masala, where you have these expansive flat sort of lagoon type areas where they're harvesting salt from the ocean, and they create this perfect mirror-like finish, which just is something quite surreal. You get this can no longer tell where the sky ends and the sea meets, and so on and so forth. It's really quite lovely, and definitely puts the old how to paint skies to the test. So yeah, really exciting, and I hope some of you will consider joining us there, because I think we'll have a fantastic time. And I think what I'll do now is I'll just open it up. People have questions. I see some questions in the chat here. So in a second, I'll send out a message it'll ask you to unmute. If you have a question, then feel free to fire away. And if not, then don't. But there you go. It should be on your screens at this point. Otherwise, write in chat. And I think there's a question here. Let's see. From
I had a question.
Yeah.
I had a question, Peter. This is Mike. And Ephraim, I wanted to ask you specifically, how much time in your career have you spent painting in Italy? And we're the lucky owners of one of your most marvelous paintings from Palermo. And did you study in Palermo or in Italy? And if you could just sort of describe your background in terms of painting in Italy.
I did not study in Italy, although I have a lot of friends who did study in different ateliers, particularly the ones in Florence. No, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and I studied at the Brooklyn Museum Art School. And then I went to Columbia and did some fine arts there, particularly printmaking. But I mostly went to the Art Students League, which is on 57th Street. And that's where I really learned how to paint. I had great teachers like Francis Cunningham and Harvey Dinnerstein and Robert Beverly Hale, people like that. I was lucky to catch Hale right at the end of his life. And his anatomy lectures were like nothing else. The interesting thing is, I think I trained as a figure painter, more or less. In other words, I did like 5 years of anatomy study, including dissection. And I thought I was mostly going to paint figures, and I still do paint figures, but the second I started going outside, I just loved it so much. And a huge turning point for me, when I graduated from Columbia, I was given a fellowship to go to Cambridge for a year. And I went there to both study the work of John Constable and also to go out into Constable country and paint, the English fields, which just were so beautiful. And I think going to Italy after that was really just an extension of that, of seeing the kind of farmland. I think because farms are smaller there and broken up into these beautiful quilt-like patches, something that you just don't get in American farms. I just fell in love with Tuscany right away. And then, like you said, about maybe 9 years ago, we went down to Sicily, and Palermo was just extraordinary town. And I particularly love the opera house there and that group of equestrian statues. It's like the gods are coming down to Palermo to give music to the opera house, so it was really a romantic feeling for me. Yeah.
Well said. Well said. We have another question here from Rosetta, actually. She's asking if you recommend prepping canvases and returning to a location multiple sessions, and if you have any tips for painting from photographs.
Wow.
It's 2 questions.
One at a time. Do I prep canvases, meaning do I put an imprimatura on them, a tone? I tend to paint on the white canvas myself. What I find is that if you tint a canvas with a middle tone, people do that so that they can get in the middle range of the value. But what they don't necessarily realize is that that's a color, and it's usually warm or cool or something, and it tends to skew you in that direction. In other words, people will often put down a raw umber or a burnt sienna imprimatura, and then a week later, they'll say, why am I painting so brown? And I'm like, well, you put down a brown underpainting, that has something to do with it. You tend to get sucked into that initial color. So I find that when I'm painting on the white canvas, white is absolutely neutral that way. It's neither warm nor cool, and it gives me one of my extremes. In other words, if you can identify in a painting your lightest light, your darkest dark, your warmest warm, and your coolest cool, you've basically got the parameters of your range there. And the white gives you this absolute light. So anyway, I use the white canvas most of the time. I don't want to be dogmatic about it, but then do I return to sites multiple times? Absolutely. I mean, I can make up my mind that I'm going to paint a painting in one session. It's what we call premier coup painting, or first strike. And that you have to do in one period. You can't come back. I mean, that's part of the logic of premier coup painting. And it's a pretty firm logic, because what it says is that your initial impulse, which is only there for a short period of time, is what you want to go with. And if you come back on subsequent days, you have different impulses and you're going to change it. So you shouldn't worry about not finishing or not having details. You're getting the great big organization of color values in a premier coup. A lot of people paint premier coup with the palette knife. Hawthorne, in Hawthorne on Painting, suggests that people use the palette knife. Why? Because you can't get involved in tiny little details. There's no putting in the eyeball, you have to just get the big plane of the face. Right. Either big brushes or the palette knife, that kind of thing. And then your last question, I mean, we could have an entire course on how to work from photographs. I would say for me, the major things are spatially. In other words, photographs make things look like they're receding into space much faster than they do to the naked eye. In other words, we're binocular and a photograph is monocular. So we're actually seeing around the sides of things a little bit in a way that the camera does not. It's absolutely ruthless. So if I had two objects, one here and one a foot away, and I was looking at them, they would look a certain way. If I took a photograph of that, the back object would feel like it was way farther away. And that has to do with it being monocular. The other thing is color. Like I said before, I just cannot begin to get the subtlety and the range of color value in a photograph that I can in nature. So what I try to do is go to a site, and if I only have a couple of sessions, I'll just try to get the big, simple color notes down. This is the sky. This is the basic, part of the land. This is what the building is in the light. This is what the building is in the shade. Just get those things with no regard for counting windows or how many chimneys, nothing like that. And then if I take a photograph, I use the photograph for information, just those sort of things. Oh, well, there's a fence in front of it and it has 28 poles in it and, that kind of thing. That's how I kind of marry, but I would never work from a photograph in a place that I hadn't been myself to see it, just because I can't trust the information. But that's just me. Other people are different. And I use the photograph as a way to help me make a painting as I would if I was there. There is a school of what we call photorealism, and those people want reality to look like photographs, not like reality. So, photographs can be used in many, many different ways. That being said, I would just say that photographs now are just better than they have ever been. So at some point, they may be able to, Google or Apple will be able to close the gap between our eyes and photographs. Right now, there's still a pretty big gap. Yeah.
Excellent. We have another question here from Julie. She's asking what mediums are suggested for this workshop and what locations are we considering to paint in? So I guess that's a bit for both of us. But actually, maybe you want to mention that this workshop, while initially or primarily concerned with oil painting, is in fact actually open to other mediums, and maybe you have some words on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to have anyone who wants to work in any medium they want. I mean, I work in oil paint, pastels, gouache, watercolor, just plain drawing. If you want to go and draw or sketch, that's fine with me. That's a really important thing to do. As far as media goes, I myself tend to use just turpentine or odorless mineral spirits. I don't get into a lot of oiled mediums. Now, if I need something like that, I use Liquin. It's a Winsor & Newton product, and it's an accelerator. In other words, a very fast drying medium. So it allows you to go back over it pretty quickly, particularly if you're out in the sun. It'll probably dry before you're home. But my feeling is that, many of you who've painted for a while in oil are more than happy to just bring whatever you're comfortable using. And then I can go over with you some different options. Well, I see you're using this, this has these pluses and these minuses. Maybe you might try something like this. In other words, I don't think, people make revolutions in their painting method in a week, but we can talk about what you've been doing in the past and how that's helping you and maybe how it's giving you a hard time. And because there's no perfect solution to any of this. Everything has a plus and a minus. Like I said, for myself, I tend to just use solvents, which Rosetta is going to supply for us. I can't carry them on the airplane. And then as far as locations, I'll turn you back to Peter, who can talk to you about that.
Say some more. Yeah, I mean, we have a plethora of locations that we're going to be attending. It's I don't know if we can go through all of them and such, but basically the salt flats around Marsala are definitely going to be part of it. We're going to go to a medieval city on top of a mountain, Erice, which is just astonishing views where you have this dramatic medieval city built thousands of years ago over multiple sort of phases, actually, as different people sort of came and went from there, and the clouds kind of rolling underneath you. You're that high up. It's quite incredible, quite incredible to see it. In fact, this image on screen right now is is one of the views from the top of that area. We'll also go to Sicily. I might be pronouncing some of these things wrong, or that might correct me later. But we'll go to Sicily, where it's we'll find an incredibly well preserved ruins, actually. Roman, I presume. In fact, I believe they're, or Greek, or I mean, well, regardless, they're phenomenal. Let me unmute you, Rosetta. Maybe you have some you can give more factual context.
Yes, I just wanted to say that the area is called Segesta.
Segesta, thank you.
These are ancient Greek ruins, and it's the site of Hellenistic Greek expansion into other areas. And so the Greeks actually came into Sicily and created colonies there. And so you see Greek ruins all over Sicily, but we have the most well-preserved ruins in Western Sicily. And so that's it's quite a thrill to see not only the temple, a beautiful temple dedicated to Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, and her daughter Persephone, the goddess of the underworld, but also a very beautiful amphitheater that's there as well.
It's truly out of this world experience, actually. This monument standing there, it's so well preserved, and just glows in the sun when it hits when it's hit by the sun, and in the setting. Yeah, it's quite amazing. It's really like you couldn't make it up. You think you're dreaming when you're there. It's really beautiful. Yeah. These are some of the locations we'll be going to, as well as more sort of more personal, intimate locations in olive groves and vineyards in the local region. We also have trips to certain key museums planned to cover. Perhaps you had some there, Rosetta, you want to mention?
Yeah, Marsala historically is a very interesting area. It was founded by Phoenicians, and the Phoenicians were pushed out by the Greeks, the colonizing Greeks, and Romans as well were in the area. Because Sicily is in the heart of the Mediterranean, it was in the middle, it was a crossroad for all of the trade routes. So Sicily in antiquity was extremely important as a territory, and many cultures wanted to conquer it. So wars took place right in our lagoon, and the most significant one was between the Romans and Carthage. And so you see these very ancient Roman ships that have been found in our waters, in our lagoons, preserved intact. And there is a museum that hosts this particular ruin, these Carthaginian and Roman ships. And so you're able to see the construction of these ships and see a whole video and information about how these wars were fought. They're very strategic, planned kind of things. It's truly fascinating.
It's really is, and I think touching on what Ephraim was saying about some of the qualities that you get from plein air painting that you don't get from the studio, I suppose, is that being there physically and like kind of immersing yourself into the culture of the area is so much more than what a photo can ever provide you. You see a picture of it and you think, oh yes, I see, it's beautiful. But when you're there, the sort of full sensorial kind of experience, and also the time, I suppose, the time that you're there and the information that accumulates over the days, it starts to come through, I think, in the works that are created there. And then you can bring that home and have that as a sort of a reservoir of knowledge and painting experience that can go into your work long into the future. Did you have a question, Rosetta? Please.
I just wanted to add one other thing, and that is that it's impossible to see Sicily. There's a famous quote by Goethe that says, to understand Italy, you must see Sicily. And I think that's true even today. you cannot see Sicily without understanding and really experiencing the cultures that created Sicily. And one of the really fun things about this trip, and I think Julie and some of the others who have been on these trips before might speak to this as well, is that you get to really sample those cultures, both in the food, in the customs, in the celebrations, folkloric celebrations. So it's not just painting, it's also almost impossible to separate painting from the cultural aspect of the experience. And I think that's one of the really wonderful things about the country.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's actually a question here from Dolores, actually asking to Ephraim whether you sketch with paint on the canvas before you begin using full color, or if you're, I guess if you're sketching maybe in paint, or if you're sketching in a different medium, or maybe just in general your process as a whole from starting a composition.
Hi, Dolores. Just quickly, there's sort of two questions in there. One is, how much drawing do you do before you paint? And then what do you do the drawing with? Some people do very little drawing. They really feel like they don't want the paint, they don't want their painting to look like a tinted drawing. So they tend to do a minimum amount of drawing. Some people like Eckersberg, you look at the preliminary drawings for these paintings, they're like engineering drawings. He's drawn everything out. So there's that whole range, and you kind of have to figure out where you are. I tend to, Dickinson said, to do as little drawing as is compatible with your conscience. And I think that's a nice way of thinking about it. So I tend to get the big simple shapes in. I want to know, I think of the drawing as a map, and the map tells me where the color is going to go. So I separate the drawing and the painting in that way. Very few people can draw and paint at the same time. I mean, Sargent could do it. I don't have enough gigabytes in my head. So I have to sort of solve the drawing problems, and then I work on the color problems. As far as what I do it with, I start out with charcoal. Why? Because it's the least commitment. In other words, if I block it in charcoal and I don't like it, or something's wrong with it, it's too big or too small or whatever, I just brush it away with a chamois and start again. And when I get a drawing that I like, then I fix it with graphite and brush the charcoal away so it doesn't mix in with my paint. A lot of people do the initial sketching in with like wet paint, thinned out with turpentine or something. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. For me, that sometimes gets mixed in with your paint a little bit, or again, you have to do it with some sort of color or other. And are you sort of, skewing the look of the thing in one way or another? But there's a lot of ways to do that. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you everyone so much for taking the time. Oh, I have another question here. Wow, just sneaking in there right at the end there, Naomi. Asking if we will supply easels, paints, etc. We will have an amount of easels that are available for people to use at the workshop. And so that's absolutely possible. With paints, we stock a variety of paints on site in our reserves at the studio, and there will be an option there to you won't run out of a particular color and not have the option to be able to get access to a particular color, and so on and so forth. So I think the main thing that's important is that when if you have something that's small and light and that you really like to travel with, and you specifically want to travel with your small pochade box or whatever it might be, because you know it very well and you like working with it, then by all means that's recommended to bring. If however that you don't have the material, then we will find ways to make sure that you have material and that you're able to partake and participate. I think the real thing to bring is also your brushes. there it's so personal. We do also stock brushes, but I would recommend packing those and some of your favorite tube colors that you like. Yeah, and otherwise reach out to me in advance to let me know what you have concerns with potentially bringing or not bringing, and we'll find solutions and make sure that you have everything you need. And the little three-legged stools question from Dolores. Yes, we'll have those. We have something so that it's fun to paint standing up, but it can be pretty exhausting. So we also have seats available to make it a comfortable experience.
I also recommend having, if you can, a painting umbrella. You noticed in a lot of those paintings, most of the artists were under an umbrella of some sort. I mean, often it's possible to inveigle your way into the shade somewhere, but that's not always possible. All of the, Jerry's, Blick's, whatever, they will sell painting umbrellas that clamp onto your easel and they fold up pretty compactly. So I would recommend that, just because I don't like to be out in the really hot, bright sun for too long. I did when I was younger, but I don't do that anymore. As with many things.
That's a great point. That's wonderful. Great. Well, we'll just reiterate this wonderful opportunity that we have right here. If you are interested in learning more, then reach out to me or anyone else on our team, and we have a contact form on our website, or you can reply directly to the email with the invitation link to this webinar if you have questions or want to know something else. There's this time-limited opportunity to get a wonderful deal on this experience. So I would definitely recommend considering that. Or if you know someone who is interested, then feel free to pass them on and let them know that this opportunity is available, because it will be really, truly wonderful and not to be missed. So this will be recorded, or this has been recorded, and I will now stop the recording. And let's see, stop recording.